Prynawn da i chi gyd, a diolch yn fawr iawn i chi am ymuno gyda ni ar gyfer ein gwebinar heddi i baratoi i ddarparu'r cymhwyster sylfaen, gan edrych yn benodol ar blymio, gwresogi ac awyru. Rydym i gyd yn gweithio adre, felly ymddeiriadau ymlaen llaw am unrhyw sŵn yn y cefndir ac unrhyw oedi yn y sleidiau. Good afternoon to you all, and thank you very much for joining us today on our webinar on how to prepare to deliver the foundation qualification, looking specifically at plumbing, heating and ventilation. As we are all working from home, I apologise in advance for any background noise and any delay in the slides. Dyma beth byddwn ni'n trafod prynhawn yma. Byddwn nhw'n edrych ar gynnwys y cynhwyster sylfaen, felly byddwn nhw'n ailadrodd ac ailedrych ar rhywfaint o gynnwys a drafodwyd yn ein gweminarau sylfaen yr wythnos diwethaf. Byddwn nhw'n edrych ar strwythur unedau ac amlinelliad o'r asesiadau gan ganolbwyntio ar yr uned blymio 113. Byddwn nhw'n edrych ar yr adnoddau a fydd ar gael i chi, yna ymlaen i'r camau nesaf, ac i gau cyfle i chi ofyn unrhyw gwestiynau i ni. Taipiwch unrhyw gwestiynau sydd gennych trwy gydol y webinar hon yn y tab cwestiynau ar ochr dde eich sgrin. Gobeithio bydd gennym amser ar ddiwedd y gyflwyniad i gael ateb gymaint o gwestiynau ag y gallwn. Mae'r sesiwn wedi ei gynllunio am awr a hanner, a bydd y cyflwyniad yn cymryd tua 40-50 munud a ddylai adael digon o amser ar gyfer eich cwestiynau. This is what we will be discussing this afternoon. We will be covering the foundation qualification content. This will help recap and revisit some content covered in last week's foundation webinars. We will look at the structure of units and an outline of the assessments with focus on the plumbing unit 113. We will have a look at the resources that will be available for you, then on to the next steps, and to close, an opportunity for you to ask us any questions. Please type in any questions that you have throughout this webinar in the questions tab on the right-hand side of your screen. We will hopefully have time at the end of the presentation to answer as many questions as we can. The session is planned for an hour and a half, and the presentation will take around 40-50 minutes, which should leave plenty of time for questions. Dyma i chi eich gyflwynwyr heddi. Here are your presenters today. David Pye, sef Cynghorydd Technegol Gwasanaethau Adeiladu i City and Guilds. David Pye, Technical Advisor for Building Services for City and Guilds. We have Ian Roberts, Cynghorydd Technegol Adeiladu City and Guilds, Technical Advisor for Construction at City and Guilds. And myself, Angharad Lloyd Fainan, Rheolwr Busnes ar gyfer Cymru. I'm the business manager for Wales at City and Guilds. Nawr, fe gen i Paul sydyn i wybod am eich dealltwriaeth chi am y cymwysterau plymio yma yn uniongyrchol. Now, we will have a quick poll to know your understanding and knowledge specifically of the plumbing qualification. Felly, sut byddech yn disgrifio eich dealltwriaeth o'r cymhwyster sylfaen yn seiliedig ar y cymwysterau plymio yn unig, gyda 5 yr rhif uchaf? Therefore, how would you rate your understanding of the foundation qualification, aiming at the plumbing aspect specifically? Please click on the number there, with 5 being the highest number. Newn ni adael chydig o eiliadau cyn dangos y canlyniadau. We'll wait a few seconds before displaying the results to give you all enough chance to click on the number. Okay. Diddorol iawn. Excellent. Diolch yn fawr i chi gyd am y poll chi. Felly gobeithio ar fynd diwedd y webinar byddai fwy o ddealltwriaeth gyda chi. Thank you very much. Hopefully by the end of this webinar you will have a greater understanding. Hoffwn nawr eich trosglwyddo i Ian Roberts a fydd yn eich tywysg trwy'r sleidiau nesaf. I would now like to pass you over to Ian Roberts, who will take you through the next slides.
Thank you and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I have no doubt some delegates may still be wondering why the transformation. The context for change has come about following the most recent sector review, named Building the Futures, a sector review of qualifications and the qualification systems in construction and the built environment, which was published in 2018. The review included many discussions with various stakeholders, including employers. In brief, the outcome was as follows: to help meet the skills needs of Wales, reducing the number of qualifications, providing a clear progression routes throughout, and portability within Wales and beyond. Next slide, please. With regards to stakeholder engagement, here we've provided a brief overview of the stakeholders that we have helped develop and shaped the content we have developed. Employers including micro businesses, medium and large contractors. Current practitioners across the sector produced by your peers with experience of delivering qualifications and resources that are required. Whatever we produce is through an agreement with Qualification Wales. Next slide, please. The foundation qualification that we are going to cover is the entry point for learners who wish to start their journey towards occupational competence in a construction or building services engineering trade. The diagram shows the various learner journeys through the new suite of qualifications, and how the foundation is the starting point. Learner A, which I will commence with, starts the full-time learner on the foundation qualification, and then after the first year gains employment, then they will start their apprenticeship, which is a level 3 qualification. Learner B, here we can see they commence as a full-time learner on the foundation qualification, and due to not being able to secure employment, return to continue on a second year full-time progression qualification. Learner C has been successful in gaining employment as an apprentice and will therefore work towards their core qualification, which is the mandatory foundation units plus one trade unit that they will be going through their apprenticeship with, and then continue their education as an apprentice. I would now like to hand you back to David.
Thank you very much, Ian and Halid, and welcome everyone. I hope you're all safe and well. So the first document to draw your attention to is the Qualification Handbook. It's always the starting point when considering the content, the depth and the understanding of the unit structure. The handbook is available from the Skills for Wales website. The link is on the slide. The next document we will consider during this presentation is the assessment pack. This is broken down into sections. Section 2 for the learner and section 3, 4 and 5 for the assessor. If you haven't done so already, please familiarise yourselves with these documents. So the rules of combination. As shown on the previous slide, the GLH for the qualification is 540. It's worth pointing out again that the total qualification time is also inclusive of some of the extra time spent on self-study, reflection time, some formative assessments, and so on. So the total qualification time comes to 600, but the GLH for the qualification is 540. Here we can see all the core units, and we've selected for this webinar, we've selected on this unit structure, the plumbing, heating and ventilation unit. So that's at the bottom of the screen there, showing 140 GLH. You'll be familiar with much of the content in the core units, as we've previously delivered units in plumbing before, covering health and safety, environmental impacts, wastage of materials, working with other trades and so on. So I wouldn't expect staff to require much upskilling to be aware of the new unit structure. However, to support the delivery of this, we do have a new foundation textbook, but more on this a little bit later. To meet the rules of combination and the 540 GLH, learners and centres will need to select a second trade specific unit. In your planning, this will require some consideration with your timetabling, preparing for an assessment, the exams, the project. You'll need to work with possibly other tutors or your managers to consider this when timetabling for the foundation qualification. Okay, let's have a look a little deeper in the units. There can be a temptation to look at the assessments and work backwards to delivery. But if we consider the handbook and the details in the units, we will get a full picture of the full outlook of the content to be delivered. The learning outcome is the overview. The criteria starts to detail what outcome is expected for successful assessment. And the range indicates the breadth of knowledge to be covered. All elements of the range must be covered in delivery. On the bottom left-hand side of the screen, you can see where these documents can be found on the Skills for Wales website. This is the unit we are considering today, plumbing, heating and ventilation. The top of the page will show the title, the level and the GLH, which we said before is 140. It then goes on to describe an overview of the unit. It's worth reminding us all at this moment that all the trade-specific units are allocated 140 GLH. Following on, we can see the learning outcome discussed on an earlier slide. Know the fundamental principles of plumbing and heating systems. If we look at criteria 1.4 as an example, we can see the types of layout features of core water systems. We could then ask which systems. This is where we consider the range, direct, indirect, and boosted. Then we can ask what depth. In the depth statements, just off screen, it discusses advantages and disadvantages, giving you an indication of where to aim your teaching. Just a quick look at Unit 102 and outcomes 1.1 and 1.2 to reinforce the previous slide. You can see the same layout and structure, considering the main activities of trades will link into the learner project as it forms part of the planning. So it's just an overview again of the similar approach from the slide before. We can see the criteria, then we can see the range, and then we can look at the delivery outcomes below, showing more depth of content. So often the question is, well, what depth do we go into? How far do we go? How much understanding is required? And this is where the handbook really helps aim the depth of what and how you deliver. So for an example, we'll look further down on 1.2 on the depth. So when we're talking about the plumbing trade, what do we need to consider as part of it? Well, at least the first and second fix, hot and cold systems, domestic heating, surface and wastewater systems. So the learner on all the trades will need to understand an overview of all of those trades. So let's take a closer look at the assessment. The foundation qualification is assessed using 3 assessment methods. The on-screen assessment is externally set and externally marked with an overall weighting of 20%. The practical project, covering trade areas, is externally set, internally marked with a weighting of 60%. And the guided discussion, which brings it all together, is externally set and internally marked with a weighting of 20%. So hopefully that gives you an overview that very often at this level the learners are engaged with their practical skills, and we want them doing well within the project and the related practical skills with it, and we can show that the majority of the marks come from this form of assessment. So the on-screen assessments covering the core units is 70 minutes long and 45 questions long, and is completed prior to the practical and guided discussion. The practical project is made up of 3 tasks that require a learner to plan, do, and evaluate. As we said earlier, it's externally set, internally marked, and externally verified, and it's taken before the guided discussion. The guided discussion contains 3 parts, including the learner's reflection. This method of assessment is externally set, internally marked, and externally verified. The guided discussion can only take place once the learner has completed the practical project. If learners want to take the health and safety assessment external to this qualification, that will help them progress to a CSCS card. That can be done, but it's not part of this qualification. It's worth noting as well at this point that if a learner fails to successfully achieve a pass grade in any of the assessments, then they are permitted to resubmit just that part of the assessment. Here we can see some examples of the questions from the on-screen test. Some are straightforward multiple choice, some are drag and drop, and others are pictures asking the learner to identify. This will be very similar to what we have done on many current assessments and qualifications, with the possible addition of a bit of variety with the questions. So let's have a look at the practical project. This will be a new approach to assessment, but previously we've used many similar approaches in previous assessments, particularly when we consider design type assessments and practicals with supporting evidence. The first section is planning, which is made up of 5 tasks. These are the same tasks regardless of trade area. The approach is the same, but the content would differ dependent on the trade selected. The time allocated to planning is 15 hours. If you gain any time in this part of the assessment, it can't be used in any other parts of the assessment. The second section is the actual practical. The time allocated is 20 hours for each trade. Learners will use their own materials lists and other planning that they've developed, as this will link their planning to their practical, so their doing. The review section has 5 hours allocated. This will link their own planning and their project as part of a complete review. So here we can see the sample assessment, which in this case for plumbing is a plumbing frame. No doubt you're very familiar with this type of assessment. The frame will bring together different skills from across the unit content and tie in with previous planning activities, the learner has completed. To accompany the framework diagram, there is also a specification of pipework materials, the expectation of where to measure from and to, and how the joints will be made. So I don't think there's any surprises with this type of assessment. It may be a slightly different frame, using slightly different detail throughout the frame, but it's a process that we're probably very familiar with. So here we can see the materials list. There will be an overview materials list for the centre to help the centre plan and prepare for the assessments, but this isn't to be shared with the learner, as they will make their own as part of their own planning activity. The right-hand side of the slide shows the marking grid. The grid helps us grade the learner as we use the tolerances to apply marks, such as within 2 millimeters for 3 marks. So this should be a relatively straightforward activity. It's not too dissimilar to what we use in some other qualifications, such as a 7202, where we're measuring the frame using the tolerances. We can use these tick boxes, which will give an overall mark. The guided discussion will explore the learner's knowledge of the wider construction sector, one of their chosen trade areas, and will link the planning to the practical, and it will review their own performance. So here's an overview of the assessments for the foundation qualification, but let's focus on the summary. Learners will receive a provisional grade for the practical project and guided discussion within a week of completion. It will then undergo internal and external quality assurance, and the final grading will be issued by City and Guilds. It's worth noting the slight change in procedure to current qualifications. This is to enable us to quality assure and to calculate the grading based on the results across all 3 assessments. As we said earlier, there is an opportunity to resubmit an assessment if a learner hasn't been successful. So the final section will have an overview of some of our resources. We have a prospectus document available on the Skills for Wales website to help centres with their own promotional literature. We also have an overview resources document to provide centres with assistance for their initial planning. So if you're not familiar with these documents, you may have seen them on the website before, or we've introduced them in other webinars that we've run. It's worthwhile accessing these and printing them off. It's a good resource to give you an overview of the promotional literature and of the resources required. To assist in planning, we have an adaptable delivery planner. Many of you will have seen this in our initial foundation webinars. It is an editable document to support planning and delivery of the qualification. To support your CPD, we will be releasing a quarterly newsletter with links to various opportunities to engage with learners, to engage with different learning experiences. These may be links to dedicated videos, it could be manufacturers' news or updates or courses. There's a variety of things we'll aim to put into our quarterly newsletter. We have a completely new suite of tutor resources, as you can see on this slide, some of the snips from the brand new plumbing resources. These have been offered for review, and they include the typical support materials such as presentations, handouts, question papers, and so on. We're creating a resource section on the Skills for Wales website to collect learning resources from third parties such as providers and centres. We also hope to link to the relevant courses from trade and industry bodies such as CITB, CIPHE, NFB, and so on. We're very delighted to showcase this new resource from Hodder Education. This is a new foundation textbook. There will be very shortly this new dedicated foundation book created to support delivery and learning. There is a sample chapter which can be accessed through the link on the slide. Some key points are the sections covering knowledge tests and preparation for assessment, which I'm sure will be very useful in preparing learners for their assessments and helping tutors to deliver these core units. In addition, Hodder are creating a free mapping document into their current plumbing and heating textbooks, so they can be used with the new suite of qualifications. The current textbooks that Hodder have, they will still be useful for the delivery of the Qualification Wales new qualifications, and we'll have a document to help link the content of the new qualifications to the current textbooks. So thank you very much. I'd like to hand you back to my colleague Ian to take you through the final slides before we take questions.
Thank you, David. Before I commence, may I take this opportunity to remind people, although you are all aware that Qualifications Wales wrote to all colleges before the end of December, outlining the transition arrangements that would be implemented commencing September 2021. Qualification Wales during January held 2 webinars to go through the transition arrangements. Recording of these webinars are available on Qualifications Wales website and will soon be on the Skills for Wales website as well. Due to the current pandemic, further discussions are at this moment in time also taking place between Qualifications Wales and colleges to discuss the transition arrangements further, and we may see additional alternatives and information after what we are about to present today. Here you can see we have highlighted 3 examples as it is at this moment in time. The first example is a learner who is currently working towards a broad level 1 qualification and will use the 6219 construction skills as an example. And then to continue as a full-time learner would move on to the foundation qualification. The second example is a learner who has covered a trade specific at level 1 qualification and again continues as a full-time learner, would be expected to continue on either the foundation, which we're going through today, level 2, or the progression level 2 qualification, which we mentioned earlier during one of the earlier slides. Example 3 is a learner who completes their trade-specific level 1 and starts an apprenticeship, who would then commence on their level 3 qualification. As I mentioned earlier, just to reinforce, there is, as we speak, discussions currently ongoing between colleges and Qualifications Wales regarding additional transition arrangements. It is, however, expected at this moment in time that any new entrants commencing within the sector in September 2021 will be registered onto the new suite of qualifications within the construction and building services engineering. Next slide, please. We're now going to be going through the timelines, the proposals and what we're going to be going and moving forward. As we move towards September 2021, we have set timelines and I would like to go through a number of these milestones with you today. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we are having to continue with webinars, and the progression and apprenticeship webinars will commence April through to May, following the same pattern as we have for the foundation. By the end of this week, the window will be live for centre approvals for the foundation qualification. The progression and apprenticeships, the window will be open from May to June. We will then provide you opportunities by running teaching, learning and assessment webinars during May to June, ready for first teaching in September 2021. There are other dates on this slide that I haven't gone through to provide you the confidence of where we are at this moment in time. Fingers crossed, moving forward, we are planning to commence face-to-face meetings in September, and we will begin with our Go Live events. And from then onwards, we will continue to provide you with support throughout the next academic year. I would now like to pass you back to David. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian, and thanks everyone. That concludes sort of the main presentation part of this webinar. What we'll do now is we'll pause just for a few moments to give you all a chance to think of any questions that you may have. Please type in the questions tab any questions you might have on the foundation qualification. We'll start to review those and then we'll hopefully work our way through and start to answer them all. We do have a couple more slides just after we've done the questions, but we'll just pause for a few moments to have a look at your questions. Thank you. So we have a question around the new resources on SmartScreen and when they may be available. I think the majority of the resources have been completed. I haven't got a specific date. I don't know if you have one, Ian, certainly in time for delivery.
Yes, David, they're actually, sorry, David. Sorry. Yes, there will be available commencing April for people to review, and they'll all be finalised by June of this academic year. So there will be drip feeding them in as ongoing, but they will commence in April for people to view again. Thank you. There's two questions, David. One question is, when will you send a link out for the new handbook? I presume we're talking about the qualification handbook, David.
Yeah, so following the webinar, we normally always follow up with a copy of the slides and some post-webinar information. The links are in the slideshow, but if anyone's struggling to find any of the information, please come to me direct, david.pye@sittingills.com, and I can signpost you towards it. It's on the Skills for Wales website under documents, and on one of the slides earlier, I showed a little snippet in the bottom left-hand corner with the assessment samples, sample of the on-screen test. The handbook was the bottom one of those, I think. So they are there now if you can access those. But if you're struggling with that, please get in touch direct and I'll try and signpost you to the documents. No problem.
And the next question is, David, will there be an opportunity for learners for a level 1 qualification, maybe before the foundation qualification, if they're not yet ready for to commence the foundation qualification? What opportunity will be for learners?
There will be we're working on a pre-foundation, so there's currently a 6219 construction qualification with a series of different units. but we're also considering and looking into possibility of a not a sector specific version of the 7202 level 1 pre-foundation, which includes both plumbing and electrical. So that's being considered at this moment in time as part of the discussions. Ian, I don't have any other questions coming through on my tab. I know it happened to a colleague the other day when it wasn't refreshing and sending the most recent questions. So if there are any others coming up that you can see that I can't, if you wouldn't mind just reading them out, please.
Yeah, there's none at the moment, David. It's not really a question, David, but I could turn it into a question if I may for you. Will there be an opportunity for people to evaluate, review and evaluate the new resources, or be able to become involved in evaluating any material that's being developed?
Yeah, certainly. What we do is we work with a variety of consultants, and we're always inviting people to share an interest in becoming a consultant for us. One of those roles as a consultant would be an official review of content. But equally, just before we launch material, sometimes we'll share some parts of that material with a variety of staff, just for their thoughts to have early sight. So if it's an official role, working through the material to find any issues, find any problems, double check that we've signposted correct and most recent regulations. That's one type of dedicated role. But if it's just as an early glance at some material, just to have an idea of what the content, how it will look, how it will come across, how it can be used, and maybe some general feedback, then yes, each of those two things are possible. What I'd probably request is if anyone's interested in those type of roles, please email me and I will share that with our Smart Screen team. So some of the staff who are heading up on that in the Smart Screen team are often looking for people, new consultants to contribute. It's good to have a team and a selection of a variety of different consultants from different areas and backgrounds and experiences. So we'd be keen to hear from you. So maybe just send me an expression of interest, possibly if you want a deeper look, a CV, a little bit of your background, and that can be then help us assign the most suitable sort of consultancy role. It's asking about if you're considering a level 1, what about students this year? It's been considered for this year. So I'm pretty sure we've already got it's agreed for the 6219 level 1, which is a generic broad-based pre-foundation type course. It can't be sector specific because the foundation is at level 2 and is meant to give a broad spectrum of skills to that learner. So we couldn't have a trade specific pre-foundation and then a broad foundation. So we've got to be careful that the pre-foundation is also broad and is a stepping stone into the foundation. So 6219 is already a qualification that's available. So there is that for the learners, and we'll keep you updated with any other changes or updates that we may have.
I think it's crucial that we should make this pretty clear, to be honest. We've been asked to produce a level 1 that's currently out there at this moment in time after a considerable number of consultations between Qualifications Wales and BARC and colleges themselves, because they raised concerns about regarding learners who may not yet be ready to commence the foundation. So that's what Qualifications Wales have looked closely at, is the 6219 and one for electrical and plumbing, which is a broad base, which is what you've mentioned, David.
Yeah, I think that's an important message you say there, Ian, is that it's expected that the entrance point for the majority of learners will be the foundation at level 2. It is quite broad-based. I know it's level 2 and some we feel in the past they're not ready for that, so there will be an option for those who are not ready for it. But I think with it being broad-based, it is a suitable entrance point for possibly more learners than we previously would have considered with the current qualifications. So I'd consider the content and the approach to the assessment before, and consider that carefully before assigning the learner to whether you feel they need a pre-foundation or can go direct to the foundation. There's a question about the support materials. Will they be held on the Sitting Girls or the EAL website? For the foundation, Sitting Girls, so the qualification at foundation is developed by ourselves, Sitting Girls. So all of the support material for the foundation will be created and held by ourselves.
Just to add to that, David, the shared content that you mentioned on the resources, there'll be links placed on the Skills for Wales website where people can click onto that, and then it'll send you directly to the whatever the materials are actually stored. So in other words, we saw one there from colleague Cigar, so it'll be able to link into that wherever they're stored accordingly.
Yeah, that'd be really helpful, one. It's almost a shortcut, so you can go direct to the Skills for Wales website and then shortcut to the appropriate support material.
And just a crucial reminder, really, if you've not signed up to the Skills for Wales website, then please do so, because that's where you'll get direct links from, and it'll keep you well updated as well as we move forward and we progress in the coming months, because there will be a lot of new information going out there to certain links, especially to the resources, to be able to review and feedback accordingly.
Someone sharing some thoughts around the level 1, so saying historical level 1 has been an opportunity for the learner to develop hand skills, and the assessment schedule at level 2 leaves less time to develop those practical skills. I understand in the current format with plumbing, particularly with the 6035 technical certificate, there's a lot of detailed plumbing knowledge content required. That's not the same in the foundation. The foundation core units are very generic, and I'm sure you'll find very broad and not too dissimilar to what we've delivered in some of the units before. And 60% of the overall grade comes from the practical projects. So it's designed very much to reward the learners who are doing well on that practical project. So hopefully you will find there's sufficient time for the practical skills in the foundation. So you've only got the one exam as opposed to the current level 2 in plumbing. There's what, 8 or 9 Evolve exams. I know it's there's quite a lot of Evolve exams because it's unitised, but there's one knowledge exam with this foundation. And these are good discussions, really, because if people are new to looking at this qualification, we tend to make judgments on the approach and the delivery based on what we delivered before. And having a look at the new structure, the new content, we may look at those things a little bit differently. So you may not come to a decision here now on this webinar about the best way to move forward with it. But if we have these discussions and topics and we share our experiences, you can mull it over, you can take it away, you can reflect. And when you have discussions internally, you may decide that these are suitable approaches, and we can tinker with this here and there so it suits the learners. So if anyone else got any feedback on those similar topics, any of those thoughts, please type away and we'll just discuss them.
I think that's a valid point, is that, David, because although we've presented, there may be not many burning questions, but there may be some areas that they may think we haven't covered. during the presentation. So if there's any areas that still would require additional clarification, although it might not be a question, just please put it in and see if we can answer any or give you a further update.
Yeah, that'd be good. Good to discuss, wouldn't it, Ian? Because we've presented on this, and you're never quite sure how much depth. We don't want to duplicate some of the things that you're saying, but you're not too sure if that's enough depth for the delegates who are on the call. So, yeah, if there's something we glossed over quickly that you'd like us to go over again, or a bit more detail in a different area, please let us know. What about future sessions? You know, we're aware that we need to do some deeper dives in future, where we'll take a closer look. What are your thoughts about those? When would you like to see those? How helpful would you find those? And so on. So please, anything like that, please have a think and let us know.
This is a partnership, and we've got to try and develop things that's crucial to yourselves, because you're going to be the people that's delivering this. So please, you know, be honest and open with us, and just let us know if you want anything additional guidance. Please just jot it down, because it's crucial for us as well as we move forward to make sure what we do develop, we get your thoughts accordingly.
Well, the questions are drying up a little. It doesn't look like we'll be the full hour and a half, which we probably didn't expect. It's a long time to be on a webinar when we've already covered much of the content on previous ones, but we wanted it to be dedicated to the plumbing delivery staff who may have some specific questions, and we can dedicate some time to plumbing staff for the foundation. So we'll probably stay on for another 5 or 10 minutes and see if any other questions come along. But if we don't get a flurry of more questions, we'll probably close in around 10 minutes.
There is another question, David.
Okay.
I think it's a valid point, to be honest. I don't think it's a question, it's a point. Regarding if in line with Skills for Wales and Wales Skills, I feel the assessment drawing should be a similar format with datums. It's valid feedback, is that. I think the main criteria for the foundation at the moment is that we're just trying to encourage the learners to focus on that particular area, because it is a basic level for them to actually look at, and then we step up to the progression then, which we're still under development at the moment, which I hope then that you'd see a more structured drawing that actually comes out that meets that specific requirement. Excuse me. And if it doesn't, then please, by all means, just let us know in the feedback when we send it out, the drawings out. That's the type of feedback we would welcome, so we can build that in accordingly. But that answers your question.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do at this moment.
No, it's a good point, because yeah, we do the Skills for Wales skills competitions, don't we? And they always work from a datum, and the drawing we have currently isn't working directly from a datum. I think that sample is probably done on a board, not necessarily a board on a wall, as we tend to have the Skills for Wales. So I suspect the discussion would be around, is working from a datum where they progress to on the plumbing progression qualification, or is that something that comes in a foundation qualification? Remember the foundation that you may have learners who have done a foundation in 2 different trades, but get an apprenticeship in a 3rd trade that they hadn't covered as part of the apprenticeship. So you don't want to take too much of the learning from the progression, because some learners may come from a foundation with a different practical selection. So yeah, for me, I think they certainly should know about datums, definitely. Whether it has to be part of this assessment, or whether that be more suitable for the progression assessment, showing the next step on the skills, I'm not too sure, but it's certainly a good topic to discuss and to consider. Another question about the practical assessments need to be kept for the EV. Well, there will be external verification, much as there is now at the moment. So what good practice would normally be a sample assessment of all the documentation that goes alongside it and the view of a couple of those frames as an example towards the judgment being made. So I don't think we've specifically had that question before, Ian. I don't know if you've come across that, but normal good practice would be to keep a sample.
Yeah, I think there's going to be photographic evidence and other areas as well, but there will be samples kept, David, but that guidance will come out nearer the time.
Yeah.
You're right. There's another question for you, David. Will students get a level 3 plumbing qual only, or will they have to do gas, oil, solar, etc., as well as part of a framework to get their plumbing qualification?
Yes, I can answer that. So the qualification will be the core only. So to achieve the qualification, they won't need to do any other pathway such as gas. But the apprenticeship framework will include gas. We're still waiting for the details of the finalised frameworks, I believe. And EL are working on this as part of the contract and showing of the duties. But it's expected that gas or one of those pathways will be part of the framework. So to achieve the qualification, no. To achieve the framework, yes.
Okay. Next question is, will you be using moderators for the practical assessment as you are in England? Would you like me to answer that, David? Or?
Yeah, could do, Ian, yeah.
England is a different assessment methodology to what we've got in Wales, because in Wales, what we're looking at the project, as we know, is plan, the doing, and then the reviewing. It will be externally set, like David mentioned earlier, internally marked and externally verified. So the external verification part will be part of it. So it's not really classed as moderating, it's externally verified. Hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Ian. And could you answer the next question, Ian? It's does the guided discussion have to be audio recorded?
At this moment in time, we're just getting clarification over this, and it will be audio recorded. Because when you're doing a guided discussion, it's difficult to keep trying to stop and start the learner as you're getting the discussion working with them. For example, it's not a question and answering session, it's hopefully to try and draw out the knowledge and the skills element and how they've evaluated and how they've planned and they've carried out the actual discussion. And to try and stop somebody in mid-flow while people write things down can disadvantage the learner to some. So what we're trying to do is blend it in. So if it's audio recorded, it's there and then, it's naturally occurring, and it actually happens as you go across. We're not saying there's going to be no writable evidence towards that to support that, because there will be some recordings on that guided audio recording as it's carried out. So at this moment in time, we are looking definitely to have it audio recorded, but that's not to say that there won't be some written evidence put into that as well as. Hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Ian. Next question, would it be advisable to keep a sample ability of the practical assessments, example, a pass, a distinction, a borderline fail, as part of the standardisation process? It seems like good practice to me to keep a selection, but the details of the approach to the excellent quality assurance will come out close to the time of delivery. So as Ian says, there'll still be evidence of your marking. There'll still be evidence, possibly of photographic evidence to support your judgments. How many of the frames we'd expect to keep back? We're going to discuss that in more detail at the time where we ask for a selection, or just pick a couple at random. But with the marking grid, it's fairly objective, because if you're within 2 mil, if you're within 4 mil, and so on. So it's a fairly objective marking process, as opposed to a more subjective approach that we use at the moment. We will look at the whole assessment.
Just to add a little bit to that, David, if I may.
Yeah, please.
I think what we have to remember is we want to bring you along this journey. We don't want to give you all the information now to overload, because that can have an adverse effect on you yourselves. So what we're trying to do is just bring you along that journey and then we'll go more greater into depth with this come September, October and November, because as we said, it'll be a good 12 months away from now before you're even going down this avenue. Okay, thank you.
It's a good point, Ian. We've thought very carefully about this webinar series and the timings of it and the content, and as Ian says, we didn't want to create everything, get every answer and then take everything to all the centres and all the staff at the same time, and it's a bit of overload. So we're still developing some of the detail as we deliver on these webinars, so you're getting updates as and when we're creating them, which hopefully helps, because you're getting like last week's webinars with the overview, the one several months ago were keeping you in touch with the timelines we were working on. Now we're starting to look at a bit more detail in the foundation and the documents, and the later ones will have a deeper dive again. So some of the details on these we may be sketchy on at the moment because we're still developing them, and what we've got to show is that we're liaising with you and taking your feedback. So you know, if you've got suggestions as to the approach that we can take, then please feed those back as well, and we can feed them into our assessment team. They're all helpful, and there may be still some details around the edges that we can tinker with and change if it's not quite suitable. So please share your thoughts. We've got another question. Will learners receive a certificate at the end of the foundation year? Yes, so they'll achieve a certificate, a foundation certificate, as part of this qualification. It's also worth noting, if any delegates on this webinar haven't been to any of the others, if a learner signs up on the apprenticeship, and Ian mentioned this on one of the earlier slides, even if they go direct into an apprenticeship, they will still have to do a version of the foundation qualification. That version will be called the core. It will have 6 core units, but only 1 trade-specific pathway instead of 2. So learners on the apprenticeship will still need to do the core qualification. So those 6 units, I think tutors, plumbing tutors will become very familiar with those units eventually over several years, because you'll have your foundation learners, you'll also have your direct entrance to apprenticeships having to do it. Obviously, if a learner's done the foundation before getting the apprenticeship, they wouldn't have to do then the core.
And it will be graded, of course, David.
Yes, thank you, Ian. Yeah, it'll be graded.
That seems to be the last of the questions, David, at the moment, I think. Another question coming, David. Is there going to be a minimum qualification required to gain access to the course?
There's no definitive entrance requirements, because the foundation is seen as the most common and the desired entrance point for all learners. So it's quite open and broad. But again, centres you'll have your own experiences and your own recruitment policies. You'll interview learners, you'll be checking previous results and maybe doing some diagnostics. So it's about finding the most appropriate level for the learner. So there will be some, I suspect, will be more suitable for the pre-foundation level 1 type courses. But as I said earlier, I do think that some of those learners in the past who would have gone to a level 1 may find the foundation a suitable entrance point because of its broad nature, because of the way it's designed. So I'd just consider your entrance requirements as you always do, but maybe have a fresh look, knowing the new approach to the qualifications, and you may feel that there are a few more learners that could start at the foundation. Okay, well, I've got nothing else coming through, Ian. Can you see any further questions?
I've nothing at this moment, David. Nothing coming through.
Okay, I think it's what we'll do then is we'll park those questions just for now. We've just got a couple of final slides and then we can close. So your feedback is very, very valuable. As Ian said several times when we're trying to answer the questions, that your thoughts and feedback is very valuable to us. So please look out for any surveys that follow these webinars. Please have your say. Please stay in touch with us if there's any queries you have after today. Myself and Ian are very open to trying to answer all your questions as we move forward. So thank you very much for listening, and hopefully we've answered your questions. There is a email address there. If you do have any specific further questions, as I say, you can contact me and Ian, but also please copy in the skillsforwales.customer@sittinghills.com email address. Okay, so that is the final slide. So once again, from me, David Pye, thank you very much for attending. We hope you found it helpful. I'd like to thank you on behalf of my colleague, Ian Roberts, for joining us and supporting with the webinar today. And we both look forward to supporting you moving forward with these new qualifications. Please enjoy the rest of your day and have a nice evening. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.